Today I'm going to share a sliding picture game written in Microsoft PowerApps. I'll walk through some of the salient points so that you can understand the logic. I'm going to edit the PowerApp itself. This is the second share I've done. I have, commented that I come from a Python environment, and for me, it's a learning curve. I was following Reddit, the Power Apps forum, and I read that there are people, who come to this environment and struggle to understand the lack of debugging, functionality, the lack of constructs they find in other languages. But two pieces of advice I can give is one, it's a different environment. I agree that if people want to go above a certain level without solid debugging function, they will struggle. For the construct, it's a close cousin, but not identical to Excel. Hopefully, or maybe someday in the future, as happened with Excel, there'll be a Python engine that allows maybe more functionality. Before I continue, I want to share my own posting from 9 months ago about the inverse check for solvability. The 2 points I would like to make is that not all 3x3 sliding pictures are solvable. To solve it, there is the inverse check. In effect, you count the number of swaps you make. If the number of swaps is even, it is solvable. If it is not even, then this is not solvable. Now, for those of you who have a sense of humor and a friend, you might want to alter the logic to give your friend an unsolvable 3x3, but that's up to you. The second point I would like to note is that in this post, you will see that I had help to get the logic that I am including in this program. And my suggestion to anyone who is new and is struggling to switch between maybe a procedural language to PowerApps is that places like PowerApps on Reddit are good places to be. Let's now look at the code, and in my case, my PowerApps, I have an OnStart, and in the OnStart, I'm setting up global variables and building up my environment. The first thing I have here is that I have a table, a list that I reference to get the assets I'm going to use. And in my case, it's called weekly image collection. And if I go to data, you will see it is here. If I edit the data, you will see that I have 3 records and I have column called week that is indexed and has to be unique. I have 9 images. These are the 9 blocks that make up the picture. I have an optional blank, that is the blank cell that is used to fill in the 9th position. If you leave this out, it will default to a PNG called blank.png, which is included. There is an optional link, and that ties to the more information at the bottom of the animation. So if you include one, you get more information, and if you click it, it takes you to that URL. And finally, we have the animation, and this version of the sliding picture does not have a default animation, and reserved is a boolean, and the reasoning behind reserved is to allow you to block an entry. It's not used in the logic, it's intended mainly for human consumption. This, in my case, is embedded, but if you have, a SharePoint list, you would just need to change the name to match yours, and that's basically it. I refresh it. The idea, again, here is that if there are others adding to this list, you refresh the list before you start. I set a few global variables that are referenced in the code. And as I've done before, I miss good debug functionality. And the second best option for me is to have a global variable called debug set to false. And this variable, when set to true, will set up for text boxes into which I can put values as they're changing. The base URL is the URL where we're going to get all our images. The key in my case is W followed by the week number, and I'm using the ISO week number function. You may want, you have Copilot, ask here, and you'd get an answer. Concatenate these two, so I have W1, W2, W whatever, and then I'm going to try to call up that record. And I'm using the coalesce function so that if the week is not found, I go to the week 0, which is the catch-all. If I want to default on week 30, you will see that rather than the numbers, now I have an image. Once I read my record, I'm going to pull out the various details. So I have the 9 tiles, the blank, the animation, and the link. You will notice that when I'm building the URL, I'm adding parameter v equals text now and how I want it formatted. The purpose behind this is that if the images are changing, to force the program to always get the image, I'm using the v parameter, and that parameter therefore ensures that I'm always fetching the URL. So I'm going to use a cached version. You're sacrificing the cache, the efficiency of having it local, with the ability to always get the latest version. Then I have some checks. If the image is blank, I'll default to blank. If the animation is not blank, I'll fill that. Finally, if the link is blank, I disable, so you can't click on it, nothing can happen, and I don't show this invisible. Having done that, I now do a bit of color. We'll look at this later on. A bit of sizing depending on the screen. And I set the game parameters. We start the game, that the game is not over. And since we haven't yet arrived at a win, we're not going to show the confetti. We set gtiles loop to true, and that sets a timer. And this will be the next part we are going to visit. Let me go into the screen. Here, txtr1c1 are these little text boxes. The image themselves are here. When I have situations such as this, I always like to have a reference. If I go into R1, C1, and for argument's sake, I say size, I have 18. If I go into R1, C2, you will see that for size, I don't put 18, I reference the size property of R1, C1. This means that if I change size later on, I don't have to change every player. One of the problems with PowerApps is that each module is compartmentalized, meaning that if you change here, you can't say change throughout the code. So this makes it easier to gain this efficiency. If I look at the actual block and I go to X, you will see that the X position of this block is the X position of the one before it, add the width, and add one. So if I decide to change these blocks, it becomes a lot easier, to do it quickly and efficiently. There are exceptions. For example, font, I cannot say txtr1 c1 c1 dot font. There's no font. I cannot reference it directly. I'm not really sure why this should happen, because if it's valid in one within the same window, it should be valid for the others. But in that case, I had to go back to having a global variable and referencing that. While we're on the subject of blocks, I just want to share that these images are 200 by 200 squares. So the entire image was 600, and in my case, I used Photoshop. If you know of a tool that does it, or if you would like information how to do it in Photoshop, just ask, and I or someone will share the approach we had. Now, I'm going to go into a timer called get tiles. And the first thing those of us who come from other environments will miss is the fact that we don't have looping commands. We don't have a while or a repeat. And in PowerApps, to achieve that effect, use a timer. Timer is an object that has an auto start, an ignition, when something is set to true. And you will recall when we left the OnStart of the app, we set gtiles loop to true. That kick-started it. We then have a duration, and that duration is in milliseconds. So here we're talking about 100 milliseconds, which means that this fires every 100 milliseconds. What does it do? Though we have a lot of properties, the ones we've altered are bolded out, so I can skip the others which are default. In this loop, we call a function called shuffle that returns a string as a combination of the digits 1 to 9. If I have debug on, you can see it. Provided the generated number is not the answer. Imagine a game where you started and the number that is returned, the random number, is the correct answer. You've won before you even played. So I'm saying if it is not the correct answer and the puzzle is solvable, then we have a string to work with. We can go forward. And I said gtile loop to false, so that stops the timer. I don't need to go any further. And I show the tiles. Let me go in apps and choose formulas. That is the randomizer, the shuffler. I'm going to move to the bottom where I have the logic to find whether the solution is solvable. This was written for me. Spend time using a for within a for, that doesn't work. I then asked ChatGPT at that time to give me a solution. It couldn't give me for PowerApp, and I went to PowerApps subreddit, and there a kind person gave me the logic. When I have the number, I then have nf show tiles, and here I'm going one character at a time, and depending on this value, I'm displaying the appropriate image referenced by the tile. If it is 9, I set it at blank, and since I lack the ability to do it in a loop, half a dozen lines, one has to do it a piece at a time. Once I do that, I update the little numbers on the side, which I'm calling help tiles. The button press for row 2, column 2, is tied to onSelect, and the logic, and this varies for each button. I am saying, if you click this button, if the game is not over, so if the game is over, nothing will happen. But if the game is still going, if the tile 2 is a 9, which for me is the blank, I swap the tiles. And then I update context the number of swaps, which is this 4. The best way to maybe see this in action is to enable debugging and get yourself a sheet of paper. Finally, I update the help tiles, and if the game is 1, I show 1 as a debug if enabled, and I set game over to true. When the game is over, that's the logic for the game 1. When it happens, we show the confetti. We set visible to false, we show the full picture, and we return true. If I start, look at the color, how red it is, right? If I go here and run on start and navigate to start, and it starts white. As time progresses, the timer and the swap counter, you will see that there's gradually changing color. The more info you're seeing down here, And that's the triggering that's happening there, you know. So the purpose of the second timer is twofold. It makes the time happen and it does a bit of coloring. Before I conclude, I just want for people who are new to highlight the difference between global variables and context variables. Global variables are visible from the moment they are declared throughout the code. If you have 6 screens, I happen to have one, these are always there. Context variables, on the other hand, are only available within the window where they are defined. I have 3 which are defined in main. If I had another window other than main, this would not be visible. So if I had 2 windows and I had 2 situations, they are separate. I hope you found this useful. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you, and take care.